If you haven't seen the latest announcement from World's Edge, Age of Empires has partnered with the Louvre for an exhibit on the Mamelukes. While the studio managed to remember that Mamelukes are featured in Age of Empires 3, they fell woefully short in detailing the history of the Mamelukes in the modern period and its relationship with Age of Empires 3. Instead of letting the studio's negligence be the final word, let's take a quick dive into the history of the Mamelukes. Starting with the basics, the Mamelukes were originally a caste of slave soldiers, much like the Janissaries that emerged under the Ottomans. And like Janissaries later on, the caliphs and sultans relied heavily on them for support, since as slaves they didn't owe allegiance to any local ruler. And this devolved into over-reliance over the centuries. Widespread usage of slave soldiers shows up in the Islamic world in the 9th century. By the 12th century, the Mamelukes constituted the majority of the army under Saladin, the legendary general and founder of the Ayyubid Sultanate, who placed the capital in Cairo. Saladin's successors were quite inferior to their predecessor, and wealth and power transferred into the hands of their own entrusted slaves. In 1250, just 79 years after it was founded, the Mameluke slaves overthrew the Ayyubid Sultanate after the current sultan died, immediately following a dispute between him and his Mamelukes during the 7th Crusade. The Mamelukes then cemented their rule by evicting the Crusaders, and then had a brief internal power struggle, after which the Mamelukes actually defeated the Mongols in 1260 and established themselves as an independent state, although technically under the Abbasid caliphs, who were effectively under house arrest in Cairo. The Mamelukes thus ruled Egypt and the surrounding lands until 1517, when they were conquered by the Ottomans, 64 years after the fall of Constantinople. The Mamelukes remained a powerful force in Egypt under Ottoman rule until 1805, asserting varying degrees of autonomy across 3 centuries, including periods where the Mamelukes in Egypt were functionally independent, particularly in the late 18th and early 19th century, as Ottoman power waned and the Ottomans were unable to control the local Mamluk chieftains, also called beys. This latter Mamluk period ended in 1805 following the French invasion of Egypt, during which Napoleon defeated the Mamelukes at the Battle of the Pyramids, where he decisively defeated the Mamelukes' famed cavalry, some of whom were actually then incorporated into Napoleon's personal guard. While Napoleon succeeded with defeating the Mameluke ruling elite in battle and with some societal reforms in Egypt, the campaign itself was a failure. Napoleon was evicted by the British and Ottomans, but the Ottoman force under an opportunistic Albanian commander named Muhammad Ali deposed the Mamelukes and conclusively purged them from power. But now let's get into the Age of Empires 3 connections. The easiest place to start is with the Egypt Revolt available to the Ottomans. In the in-game revolt, the Egyptians gain a bonus where they get 1 Mameluke with every shipment, and Mamelukes can be trained like any normal cavalry unit out of the stables, fort, etc. That's pretty straightforward. Now, the Egypt Revolt represents several different rebellions against Ottoman rule and against British and French interests, but the one that nicely lines up with demonstrating the Mameluke connection to Age of Empires 3 for us is the rebellion of the Mameluke Ali Bey el-Kabir in 1767. Under Ali Bey, Egypt functionally declared independence from the Ottomans, going so far as to put his own name on his coinage and seizing Mecca, Medina, and Syria. However, this Mameluke resurgence was not to last, and Ali Bey was deposed in 1772 and then assassinated, after which Ottoman suzerainty was reimposed. But what is the Mameluke unit, and how does it relate Age of Empires 3 to history? If we take a look at the unit, it is a mercenary heavy cav unit. This thing is a beast, with the highest base HP of any cavalry unit in game. The Mamelukes themselves were famed horsemen, and their cavalry were widely feared until Napoleon's invasion of Egypt. Mamelukes adhered to a chivalric code called Fuyusiyya, which heavily emphasized martial training and equestrianism, turning the Mamelukes into a devastating cavalry force. The mercenary aspect has 2 separate references. The first is a darker one. Mamelukes by nature were slave soldiers purchased for the explicit purpose of fighting in battles where they had no local loyalty. While Mameluke soldiers could be freed after their training was completed, there is no escaping the fact that they were bought. During the Mameluke Sultanate and under the Mamluk Beys in Ottoman Egypt, the Mameluke ranks were replenished by purchasing child slaves from far-flung places such as Armenia and Georgia. The second is based on what actually followed the French invasion of Egypt. After defeating the ruling Mamluk Beys, Murad and Ibrahim, and after reinforcements from France were cut off by Nelson's victory at the Battle of the Nile, Napoleon declared all Mameluke boys under the age of 16 and their personal slaves of the same age to be incorporated into the French army. The French force in Egypt eventually gained almost 300 Mameluke soldiers, who were sent to France after the British defeated the French forces in Egypt. Ultimately, 160 of these Mamelukes were incorporated into the French army as a squadron, later called the Mamelukes of the Imperial Guard. These Mamelukes notably served in the Battle of Austerlitz, the Peninsular War, the invasion of Russia, and the Battle of Waterloo, but they were largely purged from France following the Bourbon Restoration. The in-game unit model is a good representation too. It clearly shows them as a horseman, dressed correctly, and with proper weaponry. It can be obtained in-game through a few different sources, like sending the higher Egyptian Mamelukes card, or by training them from the tavern if the Mamelukes are available on the map. And as noted, if you revolt to the Egyptians, you are able to train them directly. How about Mameluke interactions with other powers present in Age of Empires 3? The incorporation of their interactions with the Ottomans is pretty clear. Using our lovely 1453 start date for the Age of Empires 3 period, or even the late 1492 date, the independent Mameluke Sultanate features itself. The Mamelukes were conquered by the Ottomans in 1517, which is a clear interaction between them and the in-game Ottoman civilization. Interestingly, in the same period, the Mameluke Sultanate had arrangements with the Venetians, represented by the Italians in the game, allowing the Venetians to control Cyprus in 1489 in exchange for substantial tribute formally agreed to in 1490, along with an agreement that the Venetians would protect the Mameluke coastline. This was largely facilitated by the fact that the Venetians and Mamlukes had a common enemy in the Portuguese, who by 1500 were directly threatening Mameluke trade interests in India when they attacked the Zamorin of Kozhikode, also known as Calicut. The Kingdom of Calicut and its ruler, the Zamorin, are actually represented in Age of Empires 3 during the Chinese campaign.
The Zamorin wishes you welcome, Admiral. All preparations have been made.
Excellent.
The Mamelukes were engaged in open warfare with the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean for 12 years. As the Mamelukes had largely depended on the Venetian fleet for defense, they actually had to construct their own navy in the Red Sea, an effort which was actually hampered by the Knights of St. John.
We are Knights of St. John. We do not surrender.
Knights? How quaint.
Whom any Age of Empires 3 player should note is represented by the Maltese, although when this occurred, they were actually on the island of Rhodes. The Knights seized shipments of lumber that were actually intended to build that Mameluke fleet, as timber was actually being shipped from the Black Sea all the way down to the Red Sea, all the way across the Mediterranean. The Knights seized shipments of lumber that were intended to build the Mameluke fleet. And, maybe Morgan Black was involved. Seizures by the Knights only delayed the fleet construction by the Mamelukes, and they were able to deploy. And the Mamelukes did actually have some naval successes against the Portuguese, but the war was ultimately cut short when the Ottomans attacked the Mamelukes, and that allowed the Portuguese to seize control over the Indian Ocean trade routes. And of course, as discussed, there was the French invasion of Egypt, where the Mamelukes fought against the French, and then later when some Mamelukes fought the British under French command during that same invasion. So for those keeping track at home, the Mamelukes had direct interactions with 7 Age of Empires 3 civilizations when the Mamelukes were a major or regional power. They are featured as a dominant cavalry unit, which is accurately portrayed in-game, and are neatly tied to the Egyptian revolt. And now you can educate both the studio and the Louvre on the connections between the Mamelukes and Age of Empires 3. Now, go and play some Age of Empires 3, and if you're playing as the Ottomans, make sure to revolt to Egypt and spam some Mamelukes.
أيوة حنفذ. نعم حنفذ.